So I'm going to introduce you to our first presentation. This is about visualising deep time, climate and landscape. And it's my pleasure to introduce you Peter Morse from Peter Morse Studio. A little bit about Peter before he comes up on stage here. Peter is a multidisciplinary media artist, filmmaker, scientific computer researcher and heritage visualisation expert who creates innovative and experimental work that explores the intersections of art, science, culture and heritage. With a deep interest in computational imaging, human-computer interaction, scientific visualisation and inference, Peter's work is characterised by a scientific approach that combines cutting-edge technologies with aesthetic principles. He has a PhD in computational geophysics and data visualisation, and another in semiotics and cultural heritage. You're all heading for Google right now, I'm sure, as I mentioned that particular word. No, you're better informed than me, I'm sure. But anyway, that's reflecting his diverse range of interests in the scientific and artistic domains. So welcome, Peter, to give your presentation. I'll just remind everyone to stay glued and look forward to your questions as Peter concludes his presentation in about 20 minutes.
So, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, of course, and I need to thank the City of Albany for supporting me in this project for Albany 2026. It's a sort of barking mad, ambitious project to visualise the Great Southern region in the context of deep time. And it's a collaboration between myself, a good friend of mine, Glenn Rogers, and a colleague of his, Steve Richter, and AI tools. I don't know if one should characterise it as, collaborating with AI, whatever, so one wouldn't want to personify it too much. So in this presentation, I've got a confession to make about the presentation, as I was running out of time to get it all together to submit it. So I started working with AI, and this whole presentation is created by Manus AI, which is an advanced AI agent. So I gave it basically all the details about the project that I'm working on, which is basically a data repository of files and images and ideas and so on. And I gave it a text prompt. I said, Manus, create a presentation addressing these key points for me for a 20-minute presentation. And I went away and had a cup of coffee and a relax for 30 minutes and came back, and my presentation was all made for me. So that's the sort of age that we're living in now, that they're working with AI. We're not just working with large language models, but working with active computer agents, which are known as reasoning models. And so I'm working with a whole bunch of reasoning models that I run locally on computers, and they can be reasoning models across a whole range of different domains, not just language behaviors and so on. So what I'm going to cover is, now that I've got that preface out of the way, what's Numen about, the idea of the big history approach, my particular interest in deep time visualization, and then an attempt to connect it with indigenous knowledge from specifically the 6 Menang Noongar seasons from the Great Southern region. Obviously, art-science integration, this notion of collaborating with both online and local AI services, because they operate as significant amplifiers for the work that I can produce over a period of time. And I'm interested in looking at data resources so I can bring in a diversity of multicultural voices, because obviously over a period of history in Albany, there's been a significant diversity of multicultural voices, both historically and in terms of contemporary change in the demographics of the region. And then I'm also very interested in climate narratives, and the idea of looking at something through a sort of deep time lens is a way of looking at how climates have changed over very long periods of time, and it also in shorter periods of time with a view to the recent future, or the near future. And then I'll cover things like how I can construct this as a sort of immersive experience and so on. So click next one. There we go, good, okay. So what is it? The initial idea is to present a sort of multimedia immersive song cycle. And the purpose of doing the song cycle is that it gives it a kind of emotive kind of element to it. There's something engaging for audiences. But it's a song cycle exploring climate and weather patterns of the Great Southern Region. So, of course, working with Glenn, I can create anxiety in Glenn by saying we need to write a song about the history of climate change in a given region. How does one do something like that? It's a kind of interesting intellectual challenge, but he's up for it. Numen refers to the idea of the spirit of place. It's got a kind of Latin root or whatever going back thousands of years. And as I said, it's this collaboration and so on. And what I'm looking at is I've got a background working extensively with immersive, high-resolution, multi-projection systems. I've worked at universities all around Australia and overseas and so on, working in very high-end sort of VR immersive visualization centers. And I'm interested in how one can use these facilities for developing cutting-edge visual storytelling in conjunction with musical performance and so on. So you get this very immersive sort of sensory experience, and it's, I think, much more engaging in a sense than VR experiences, because with VR you put the box on your head and you're isolated from other people, whereas if you have an immersive installation system, it's a much more shared sort of communal experience. And you can do it stereoscopically as well. There are all sorts of possibilities. So the big history approach views human history as part of a larger narrative, beginning really with the Big Bang, the origin of the universe. I'm not going quite back that far, just a few billion years ago, as opposed to 13 billion years ago. I'm still working on the sort of time scale that I'm interested in looking at, because it's contingent upon the sort of data that I can dig up about the Great Southern Region. So as somebody with a geophysicist's training, I'm interested in the formation, the geological formation of the region over billions of years, and we can trace this back through advanced computer simulation and a whole lot of geophysical data that's often available public source in open data repositories and so on. So it's a question of how one can address that data and visualize it, which involves, as you can imagine, quite a few technical processes. What was interesting to me looking into this sort of stuff, and it's something that I don't think is very well known, is that if you visit somewhere like the Stirling Ranges, or I believe called Kenneruff, down in the Great Southern, just outside of Albany, there was a publication that came out a number of years ago, which, and this is an arguable, debatable sort of scientific publication, there's a debate that's still going on, that there were traces of early life formation discovered in fossils at the top of the Stirling Ranges, because the top of the Stirling Ranges used to be the bottom of an ancient sea as part of the supercontinent Nuna, about 1.6 billion years ago, or on the region there, on the perimeter thereof. And so there's an interesting story, sort of origin of life story, stemming from the Stirling Ranges, which is a kind of pretty amazing sort of thing. I'm very interested in that. So we're going to explore things like the separation of East Antarctica and the formation of what's known as the Albany-Fraser origin, which is basically a strip of rocks and landscape and geology along the southern region that borders upon the very massive part of Western Australia, which is the Yilgarn Craton. A craton, spelt C-R-A-T-O-N, is a piece of the Earth's surface, a bit of land basically, that has never been subducted underneath. So the Yilgarn Craton, which is most of Western Australia, is about 4.5 billion years old, and the oldest traces of surface rocks have been detected in a place called the Jack Hills, which is up near on the way to the Pilbara. So it's a really, really interesting ancient landscape. And I'm interested in depicting the gradual drift of the Australian continent to its current location, and, as I've said, attempt to bridge some sort of indigenous knowledge and scientific understanding. And the idea is to help the audience comprehend their place within Earth's vast history. So I've been working up a sort of bit of a structure of this, how we approach it, because it's such a vast tale over such a vast period of time that, of course, one needs to be extremely selective. And so I've broken it up, I think, into about 7 or 8 parts, where we're looking at the early formation of the Earth-Moon system. That's through a collision of 2 planetoids in the early history of the solar system. So we're called Tellus and Thea. They have a very interesting story behind them, and the collision of Tellus and Thea led to the formation of the modern Earth and the Moon system. And of course, we now live with all the impacts of having a moon orbiting Earth and the tides and the influences on the development of life and so on. So there's a direct sort of connection there. Then we'll move through next stage, looking at the supercontinent cycle, which is a fascinating cycle where parts of the Earth, land masses move around and intersect with each other and form supercontinents they've formed multiple times over the history of the Earth. And as they move around the surface of the Earth, then of course it has a connection with the development of biodiversity and evolution. And notably, of course, the Great Southern is one of the great hotspots of biodiversity on Earth. So we're looking at moving from about 4.3 billion years ago to about 1.6 billion to around about 3 million years ago. And this is, of course, prior to the development of, or the emergence of modern humans. And then, will it slowly do it? Click again, there we go. We'll move into the next parts, 4 to 7, looking at 80,000 years to 200 years ago, which is, of course, covers the period of indigenous settlement of the continent of Sahul, which is what Australia was. It was connected due to lower sea levels, connected to Papua New Guinea and up to Indonesia. And this is where the land bridges were formed, where the first human movements occurred from about 80,000 years ago across along to a gradual settlement around Australia. And then, and of course, this is when the notion of the 6 seasons, I guess, emerges within Indigenous society. And then we'll pop into the 200 years ago to the present as part of Albany 2026. And what's interesting there, I think of it as sort of zooming in from, we've got this very large time period, and we're gradually zooming in and in and in to smaller periods of time and looking at how we can visualize data pertinent to those time periods. And of course, from the year 200 years ago to the present, we have, modern Australia as named by Matthew Flinders, and we have the emergence of large-scale, Western-based agriculture and land clearing. That obviously has significant impacts upon climate, and the change of biodiversity and habitat compared to the previous 80,000 or 45,000 years, depending upon your time frame, about how landscapes changed in that time frame. And then I'd like to get into some sort of speculative stuff about the next 200 years into the future. What can we tell about what the future is going to be like using things like advanced AI climate models, because there are quite a few of those around now which can do climate predictions up to about a century into the future within certain parameters. So it becomes very uncertain after a period of time. So I would like to speculate about that, but I can certainly confirm that about 1 billion years from now, none of us will be here and living on the surface of the Earth, because the sun will have expanded so much that the oceans will have evaporated. And that's the end of life on Earth, essentially 1 billion years from now. So, but we don't want to add on a sort of bummer down note like that. So that's Glenn's challenge to give us a chirpy tune to sing along with at the end there. So I'm interested, as I've said, in deep time visualization as the origins of the Earth-Moon system and this Albany phrase origin, and looking at questions of how I can render or understand the paleoclimate. So there's a lot of interesting scientific data, including going back to 350,000 years ago in Western Australia looking at the paleoclimatic record. And that will be an interesting set of parameters and detail to put into AI models that I can work with for visualization purposes. And it opens up the possibility of showing transformation through multiple ice ages and warming periods. And of course, it matches up. Well, hopefully it will match up. It'll be very interesting as we zoom closer into the current time with the indigenous knitting time in the Great Southern, which was about 12,000 years ago, which sure enough, and these are in indigenous stories, in Menang stories, they do match up with a period of glaciation and a global glaciation period, a global ice age. And these sorts of things will be worked out through geophysical modeling, computer simulation. So these are basically a simulation of our galaxy, which is a kind of interesting thing to simulate, and we'll be looking at how the Earth moves around the galaxy. The Earth moves around the galaxy. The entire solar system moves around the galaxy in a period of about 350 to 450,000 years it takes to move in one orbit. So during the 4.5 billion year history of the Earth, we've had about 8 orbits of the galaxy. And life has been evolving and things like that. The Earth moves the sun moves orbiting like this, but the planets are on their side, okay? Then we're not facing up north with the north of the galactic pole as well. We're actually moving like this, and we move in a kind of helical pattern around the galaxy. And our galaxy is a barred galaxy with about 4 large-scale galactic arms, and the arms rotate more slowly than we orbit. So that means that the Earth moves through voids between the arms and in dense parts of the arms over that course of billions of years, of millions, or hundreds of millions of years as it orbits the Earth. And so that has a direct kind of galactic impact upon the formation of Earth structures and climate over the duration of Earth's history. Now, who knew that? Kind of pretty crazy bit of information, and exciting to sort of visualize that kind of stuff. I'm also interested in sort of estranging viewers from the dead hand of the Mercatorian view of the world, where north is up and south is down. Antarctica is a little thin white strip across the bottom of the Earth. And I was very pleased to come across this projection, the Peirce quincunxial projection of the Earth, which is a kind of complex projection using complex numbers. And it enables one to visualize the entire Earth in a sort of infinitely repeatable tiling fashion, which is kind of really useful for showing the entire Earth and movements and flows of connectivity between Earth systems through the ocean and the atmosphere. And of course, Peirce, in my former life as a kind of academic semiotician, Charles Sanders Peirce was the originator. He was a French pragmatist philosopher, and the originator of Peircean semiotics that you may or may not have heard of. And he was also a mathematician, a bit of a genius. He did all these interesting things. And there's a modification here on the right-hand side of what's known as the Goyu projection, which is, again, an endlessly tesselatable projection. So I'll be exploring how I can use those in a visualization context with data overlaid. This is a movie rendered from a piece of software called, there we go, G-Plates. And you can see up in the top left-hand corner, this is a countdown from about 350 or whatever million years ago. And we're looking at a southern polar stereographic view of the Earth, slightly offset. But you can see the bits of the supercontinent of Nuna moving around. I think this is Nuna. I'm pretty sure it is at the moment. I may be wrong. I've got to check my facts about some of these things. This is because I'm dealing with such a large amount of data. One of the challenges that it's presenting to me is to draw up a really accurate timeline of the different geological periods, things matching up the supercontinent cycle, these various things like that. So this is a very striking animation. If it's about 350 million years, then you've got to imagine that this is occurring as the Earth is completing one orbit of the galaxy, and it's moving through various parts of the galactic plane. And you can see various ridging events occurring, ocean ridging events, and these ocean ridging events and the movements of the continents. The source of continental drift is driven by what are known as mantle plumes, which are really large, massive scale flows of rock from deep within the Earth's mantle up towards the surface of the Earth. And they basically set up the conveyor belt system of continental drift, and they drive the movement of the continents around the surface of the Earth. So over the course of hundreds of millions of years, the Earth has looked utterly alien to how we see it now. And I think that's that sort of estrangement from the familiar Earth that we're all used to enables one to see it in new and interesting ways. And we can see Australia slowly moving northwards, and the positioning of Antarctica, etc., and all this new seafloor is being created. The misleading thing about this animation here is that, of course, the textures of the various continents are contemporary textures, so they would have been quite different landscapes, and Antarctica would not have been covered with a giant ice sheet when it was much more located in the center of the continent, because we know indeed that about 65 million years ago there were polar dinosaurs and there were rainforests around the edge of Antarctica. So another click, right, here we go. Another thing I'll be working with, or I have worked with for many years, is Unreal Engine. This is a landscape simulation of the Stirling Ranges. This is using a cesium terrain system, which is basically like a sort of Google Earth for Unreal Engine, where you can bring in reasonably high resolution Earth model and run climate simulations or cloud simulations over time. And I can set this model of the Earth back to any time period that I desire, though of course I'm kind of stuck with the current landscape. But this is what the Stirling Ranges looks like. And one can arbitrarily fly around and create movies at different points of view. And you can overlay that with satellite data. So I'm running out of time. I'll try and get through as many slides as I can. This is on the image there is a simulation from inside Unreal Engine of what the installation will be like. We'll have 3 giant screens. It was originally going to be at the Vancouver Arts Centre, but the people at the town hall said, oh, we'd like to show it here. And I thought, oh shit, I better scale up the whole thing because it's 5 times the size, the venue size, so it's a significantly larger venue, but we'll be able to set up these very large screens with these movies playing around it. And I'm happy to be engaging with some indigenous local Menang elders, Lester Coyne and Venice Gillies, who also be having a discussion with them about the stories about and the reasons behind the 6 seasons approach to weather and climate in the Great Southern. Because I think there's a really interesting conjunction between our kind of Western calendrical view of the year, how it's divided up into the various seasons, as opposed to the indigenous knowledge of seasons, which is clearly an oral tradition developed over thousands of years, and it's much more responsive and dynamic in relation. It's a situated knowledge in landscape as opposed to an abstracted calendrical mathematical approach. And so that's something that I would like to draw out and visualize somehow. What we're doing then, this art-science integration, is to take all this complex data and transliterate it into some sort of emotionally engaging experience with cutting-edge computer visualization techniques and computer simulation and modeling. And as I've said, we're incorporating satellite data and some ultra-high definition videography. I've got a background in doing full-dome planetarium work, astrophotography, and time-lapse in places like Antarctica. And around Australia in remote regions, and so I'll be using my camera systems to create that sort of content, and that can be mapped on to the scenography as we go along. As I indicated, very interested in using these cutting-edge AI tools. One of the big challenges is to develop a logarithmic timeline, because I need to be able to zoom out from billions of years into the present And I'm kind of interested in the present, as I'm quite interested in the philosophy of time at the moment, like what is the present moment. And so I'm kind of thinking of a timeline that can zoom out to 4.6 billion years and then down into the current attosecond or femtosecond, which is a tiny, tiny period of time where you could see how far a photon of light moves. And the concept of what is the present is sort of interesting. I'll be using Swarm UI, which is a kind of comfy UI, which is an AI programming environment where you can run distributed generative AI algorithms across GPU farms. So I have a GPU farm at home, graphical processing units, and that enables me to pump through video models and still images and create these sorts of images or film sequences that visualize the data in interesting ways and interface it with using a Pythonic programming approach using things like sort of scientific Python, essentially, which is a programming language which enables one to bring in this, ingest and manipulate a whole lot of scientific data sets and create visualizations. And so there's an interesting sort of workflow about how AI can bridge scientific knowledge and public engagement through these sorts of things. I've got 5 minutes, yeah. So and then I'm going to bring in multicultural voices. You can see that this is a simulation here, and so that's drawing upon the diverse literature one can resource from things like Albany Public Library, and there's a whole fantastic section there of data that I'm keen to get in to do some mining with to find out what sort of things I can extract from that by setting my cunning AI agents upon them to extract interesting data for me. And then we'll be exploring climate narratives, so a lot of cloud data and weather and climate simulation for certain visualization episodes with music. And as I've mentioned, looking at how we can forecast what's going to be happening with the climate down there in the future, because as we know, it's all a very pressing and rather alarming scenario over the next 50 to 100 years. And the idea then is to get this multimedia immersive projection system all up and running with this wonderful musical score by Glenn Rogers and Steve Richter. We may be looking further down the strip, further ahead with the possibility of some live performance aspect to that as well. So that's going to be, as I said, in the town hall for the bicentennial, or Albany 2026, whether one should call it the bicentennial or not is arguable, but we'll be putting it within this very large, deep time context. And looking at, I'm kind of interested here, the reason I'm sort of presenting here is that I guess I would argue that heritage falls, there's a kind of geo-heritage to places as well, and understanding the history of landscapes and the possibility of visualizing them and looking at human activity within larger scale sort of deep time stories is a very compelling and interesting heritage story to tell. So in my conclusion then, we're bridging past, present and future through this immersive storytelling, hopefully a groundbreaking fusion of art, science and cultural heritage. We're covering this vast timescale, as I've indicated. I want to bridge this relationship between indigenous situated knowledge and scientific understanding through the scientific literature, draw out the deep history of the Great Southern region and embrace these cutting-edge viz technologies. And hopefully that we'll be able to engage audiences to experience the environment in new ways. And so I'll wrap up there, and I hope you can get down to Albany. I'll probably give another presentation on this next year when it's a bit more advanced, and I have some more sophisticated renders to show to demonstrate that this is all doable. So thanks for your attention.